Morning, everyone. Welcome to Ask the Expert, a daily series from 8:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. to help small businesses. Ask any questions in the comments or use the hashtag QBATE on Twitter. If you need any more advice, join the official Intuit QuickBooks SMB community group on Facebook. Accountants and business experts are on hand 24/7. During the live session, we'll be running a poll, so do engage with it, and at the end, I will reveal the results. So thank you very much for coming. My name is Nana Parry. I am the co-founder of a company called Tectonic. And what Tectonic does, it helps small to medium-sized businesses understand the true needs of their customers. So we collect qualitative data and quantitative data focused on your customer. We analyze that data and use it to create initiatives to help businesses grow their revenue and reduce their marketing costs. So today I'm going to be speaking to you about how to better engage your customers, a very important part of running a business, especially in the pandemic. But let me give a bit of context first. So most of you, I might be, showing my age a bit right now, slightly, but most of you will remember Blockbusters. I'm not sure if you know Blockbusters, there's only one left in the world, actually, in Oregon, in the US. But we also know its major competitor, its major overthrower, Netflix. And there are very many reasons as to why Blockbuster didn't survive. But one of the key reasons was because, I'm not sure if you know, but Blockbuster's profitability was heavily due to the late fees it charged its customers. And, as a customer, I think you've all experienced it. We don't want to be charged late fees for anything. But Netflix really started to understand what the needs of their customers were when they were previously loved film. And what they knew was that what customers really wanted was variety and access. So they based their whole business around that. And that was a really core reason as to why they were able to grow. So in terms of engaging your customers, there are three key metrics that we need to understand for your business. So there is the cost of acquisition, the cost of retention, and the lifetime value. So the cost of acquisition kind of says, kind of makes sense. It's how much does it cost for you to acquire new customers? And often this can be one of the most expensive things in your business. And then you've got the cost of retention, how much does it actually cost to retain the customers that you have? And then finally, the lifetime value. This is basically the metric that tells you how much revenue am I going to get from the lifetime of a customer. So if I get £500 a year from a customer and I think they're going to be with me for 4 years, then my lifetime value is £2,000. The reason I talk about these metrics is because by understanding the needs of your customer, you can create initiatives that directly influence the cost of acquiring a customer, the cost of keeping them within your ecosystem as customers, and the lifetime value of that customer as well. So here are some of the things that you could do. First of all, write down the assumptions that you have about your customer. So there are a lot of businesses right now that have assumed that their customers have the same needs that they did before the pandemic. But really and truly, if you sit down and write down what is it that you really know about your customers, and what I mean by really know is what do you have evidence from a data perspective that these are the things that your customers need. For any gaps that you have, we need to write them down and we need to frame them in a way of assumptions. So you might assume that your customer still experiences the problem that they did before today. And that might be true, that might not be true, but we need to go and test that. So be really brutal with yourselves and understand what those assumptions are and what are those things that you need to find out from your customers. Secondly, you've got your assumptions. What we want to do is create what we call actionable customer profiles. So generally, we might have customer profile documents, but one of the things we often do is write these really great documents, we put them in a drawer and we never see them again. But what's really important is that we create them to be actionable, meaning we need to understand what are the characteristics, traits, and behaviors that our customers are exhibiting. For example, a characteristic is something that is normally fixed or doesn't change often. So that could be their age, their educational attainment, their income level, those kind of things. And then you've got traits, which kind of sits between characteristics and behaviors. So traits are things that, based on the profile of the customer, they may be more likely to evidence. For example, you could argue that millennials are more inclined to share their personal lives on social media. At the moment, it's not a behavior. It doesn't mean that they're doing it, but it does mean that they may be more inclined to do so. And then you've got behaviors, really important, because these are the things that customers are doing today that they're really evidencing right now. So that could be they go to the gym twice a week, or they log into their accounting software 3 times a week. Whatever that is, those behaviors are really important to note down. So in the customer profile, now you've written down the characters, traits, and behaviors. What we really want to understand is what are the most important ones that are in there. So once you've got those, what we call the minimum mandatory criteria, we're actually going to find these customers, whether they're in your ecosystem now or they may be potential customers, and we're going to do something crazy, right? We're actually going to go and speak to them. Now, there are these tools, Google Analytics, Mixpanel for application analytics, or Hotjar for kind of heat mapping on digital products. And there is a place for them. There's no doubt that understanding the behavior of these customers from a digital perspective is very important. But what's also very important is that there's nothing quite like hearing directly from the mouth of your customer in terms of what their needs are. But how you frame those questions is really important, because it's very clear that sometimes we might be exhibiting what we call confirmation bias. And these are things where we ask questions in a way such as, oh, wouldn't it be great if XYZ existed? Well, answering that kind of question can give you some false data points, and you don't want to build your business on false data points. So what we want to do is structure questions in a way that are unbiased. So when you go and speak to them, you can actually use that data. So for example, you may ask them questions that are based on recent past behavior, such as, when was the last time you exhibited X problem? Or how much money did you spend in the last month on this? These will kind of give you some insights into their behaviors, and you can use that as well. So we've got your assumptions, we've got your actionable customer profiles and their behaviors, characteristics, and traits, and we've actually found them to speak to them. And then you're going to start looking for themes. You're going to start looking for themes across the customers that you speak to actually understand if there are certain key things that you've missed in terms of your offering or in terms of the problem they're exhibiting right now. But fundamentally, it's really important to understand that when you find these themes, you're not looking to, do a 90-day statistical analysis, right? This is about really understanding the human aspects from your customers and combining that with the quantitative data points that you found through some of the tools that you might have. So once you've combined this data and you've looked at themes, you can start to come up with specific initiatives that might help your customers themselves, but also help you either lower the cost of acquiring a customer, lowering the cost of retaining a customer, or also increasing that lifetime value. And finally, just remember that your customers are human beings. We often forget, depending on the size of the company, we may sometimes even forget why our customers are buying from us, because they're these numbers behind the screen. But ultimately, the key thing is they are human beings. They have families, they have friends, they have joys, they have problems. So it's really understanding what those are and being able to analyze the information that you get to make the appropriate decisions for your business and to help your customers grow so you grow as well. So hopefully that was really useful. I'm going to start taking some questions now. So we've got a question from Alvin on Twitter. So one of the questions is, what is the optimum volume of responses needed for a survey to be able to analyze them and get insights? And it's a really good question, Alvin, because I think firstly, we need to talk about where's the place for surveys, right? So there are different mechanisms in which you can get customer data. So you have one-to-one interviews, face-to-face or on video, potentially due to the pandemic. You've definitely got things like focus groups, you've got surveys, and some other things. But ultimately, the key thing is, what are you trying to find out with your potential survey? So at the first point is understanding what's the appropriate mechanism for you to collect data. And surveys are often done or best used when you are trying to figure out kind of key quantitative binary data for you to make more informed decisions on where you then go and have maybe some more deeper customer face-to-face interviews. So once you've understood that, okay, this survey approach is the right approach, there are things that you need to consider, such as, things like question fatigue in the survey as well. You don't want to ask too many questions, because the more questions you ask, the less quality the data will be. But once you've got all that sorted, the optimum number very much depends on your sample size, right? And there are multiple calculations you can do in terms of your sample size. But ultimately, depending on what you're trying to find out, you may find that, okay, if I get 200 responses, generally 200 to 300 responses, then I can use some of that data to figure out where I need to go deeper. But ultimately, it depends on the type of study you're doing. And it also depends on the sample size that is required. But if you are earlier stage, or you're just trying to find out one or two key business questions, or trying to figure out some business assumptions, whether they're true or not, through surveys, the best thing to do, try and hit that 200, 300 mark where possible. And then you can lower that number if you're more specific about the question that you're asking, and also the type of information that you're trying to glean from the survey. The more focused you are with the customer profile, the less responses generally that you need. So hopefully that answers your question. We've got Marianne as well from Instagram, and she said, "Hey Nana, do you ensure that the insights that you collect from customers are objective and free of any bias or subjective opinion?" And that's another really great question. So yes, one of the things that we do in our process is we really try and understand, in terms of what you're trying to find out, what are the key parts that, if we ask questions in a certain way, they may come across as bias. So one of the things that we do is we work with researchers, PhD researchers. And when we create the questions that we're asking, that we want to ask to try and find out the key answers, we actually clean those up with kind of statistical and PhD kind of research to be able to make sure that there is as little bias as possible in the questions. And as I kind of said before, the reason that we want to avoid bias is because we want to make sure that the data that we get back is actually really useful for our business. So yes, that's a really good question. Yes, we definitely do that. We got a question from Marcy. She says, "Morning, Nana. I was wondering if customer insights can be used for forecasting buying trends. In the context of the local lockdowns, do you think we can forecast demand for the next few months?" So customer insights can definitely be done for that. The interesting part of it is making sure you do so regularly. So you want to create an ecosystem where you can actually glean insights regularly, so that you can actually see when trends are starting to disappear or new trends are starting to appear. So the answer is yes, it can be done for forecasting buying trends. However, it's very much dependent on setting yourself up in a way so that you can glean these insights constantly, and you don't just think, I've done it once, I don't need to do it again. We've now got Hassan from Twitter. This is the question. "Hi Nana, I run a small apparel shop, and a key segment of my consumers are football fans who get their favorite jerseys printed at my shop. I keep a tab online on the popularity of certain teams and players to stock up on merchandise. Is there a way to make this process more effective and less time consuming?" So first of all, just fantastic that you're even doing that. There are a lot of businesses that aren't in a position yet, or aren't yet doing things at the level that you're doing to try and understand the key segment of their consumers. So well done. In terms of your question, is there a way to make this process more effective and less time consuming? There are definitely many ways. Because you are a physical shop, one of the key things that you could potentially do is, with your customers, actually in the buying process, ask them for a specific data point, right? And make sure that that's tied to some kind of system, or even if it's your own system on the side, start to glean those insights from them as they are purchasing. One of the other things that you can do to make the process more effective is kind of put this data into a digital system, but start to run some automation tools on it, for example, that can start to spit out some of the analysis. It's actually quite difficult to answer this question as fully as I'd like right now, but Hassan, if you do have any questions, please feel free to message me directly, either on LinkedIn or on Twitter, and I'll get back to you and I can give you some more bespoke information on that. We'll move to Victor, who who asked a question about characteristics. So you spoke about characteristics, traits, and behaviors. I'm only beginning my business in the next month. Can I use secondary data from similar businesses now and plan and conduct interviews once I have a customer base? So first of all, congratulations on taking the jump to start your new business. I think it's a really good point about using secondary data. So secondary data can be used to inform assumptions around your characteristics, traits, or behaviors. So I don't think it's a bad idea at all, providing it's from a reliable source, to use secondary data to inform some of these assumptions. However, your business is unique. So you will need to make sure that those secondary data assumptions are actually true with your customers. So you can use that secondary data and you can do customer interviews based on that secondary data, but you have to just go in with the mindset that these are assumptions that I have about my potential customers, but we'll need to see if they are accurate for my particular business context. Hope that answers your question. We've then got Max from Facebook. I use email surveys to collect data from my customers. The challenge I face is that there's not enough responses. How can I improve the volume of responses? So that's a really good question. So I guess the first point is, how much does volume matter for you? So sometimes we get bogged down with having to get as many responses as possible. However, based on what you're trying to do, getting 50 focused answers from your target customer might be more useful than getting 200 or 300 from lots of different people. So I think I'd first say that. In terms of finding ways to increase your response rate, one thing that's really useful is normally online specifically, there are special interest groups. So there'll be potentially a group on LinkedIn or a group on Facebook that are linked directly to what you're doing as a business. So rather than just go in and post your survey and say, okay, please fill out this survey, one of the great things you can do is enter that group and just start giving value to that group based on what that interest is. So let's say, for example, it's a group on customer experience, and everyone in that group is trying to figure out how to improve the experience of their customers. One thing that you could do is find an article online, a piece of secondary data, and then you can put that in the group and say, hey, everyone, I found this really useful article. This is what I took from it. And then as people start to engage with you, it might not happen the first time, and that's fine. But as people start to recognize you as someone who is in these different groups, trying to actually provide value into the groups, you'll be known as that. And then when it comes to the ask for you to actually get some data from them, the likelihood of them doing so increases massively. So that's one thing that you could do. I think the second thing that you could do is use certain tools like Typeform, who now have different elements to their product where you can start to target people directly, and Tectonic does this as well. But the main thing is start to focus mostly on getting the right people to answer your survey questions rather than getting huge volumes. As I kind of mentioned before, it does depend on the sample size, but the more focused you are with your customer target, the better in terms of insights. So hopefully that helps with your question. Going to Jacqueline from Instagram, says, hi Nana, thanks for talking about customer insights and its importance. Can you please help me understand what are some of the common ways small businesses go about this? I have a small team with no dedicated analytics resource. Yes, definitely. So some of the things that I mentioned before in terms of writing, trying to carve out some time to write down some of those assumptions that you have about your customer and writing that actionable customer profile. The next thing that you would do is with your current customers or with your target customers, go and find these people and actually speak to them. Well, you want to set up the meeting, and it's really important when you're setting up the meeting to actually not give them too much information about why you're trying to get these insights, because you want them to be as unbiased as possible. So actually, reach out to them via email, via Instagram, via Twitter, whatever the appropriate medium is, and then schedule that meeting. And then when you schedule that meeting, you want to leave around, hopefully 20 to 45 minutes. Ideally not longer than 45 minutes, because as I kind of mentioned before, you can get fatigue, or your respondents can get fatigue in their answers. So once you've actually got them in a Zoom call or whatever it is, having your questions prepared. And one of the ways that you can accelerate the process, especially if you're a small company, is to use some key questions that everyone kind of needs to ask when they're going through the process. And what I'll do, Jacqueline, I'll share with you a document that gives you some kind of standard questions, whether you're B2B or B2C, that are really good to ask your customers. So you can take that as a base, and then what you can do is actually ask these questions, preferably record the interview. It's really important that you ask for consent when you're recording that interview. And once you've recorded that and you've got the information, you only really need to do it if you're really focused with the assumptions that you have, the customer profile, and the specific characteristics, traits, and behaviors that are most important that you need to test. You actually only need to do it with around 10 people for every specific profile that you're speaking to, and every key business question that you're looking for. So obviously the more the better overall. Sometimes we can go a bit too far, but you'll be surprised after 7 to 10 interviews what you actually find, providing that you've done this kind of focused work on creating these assumptions, figuring out what the characteristic traits and behaviors are of your customer profile, and then going to speak to them about it, making sure you're asking unbiased questions. So that's one way that as a small team you can do it. If you're really efficient, it can be done in as little as a week, providing you've already got access to some of those customers. But it is very difficult when you're a small business. I totally understand that. If you do have any more questions, I'm happy to speak to you about it at further length. But I can just honestly say I cannot underestimate how valuable, when you actually go through this process, how much time it saves you in the long run and how much money it saves you and allows you to grow as well. Great. So we've got Prudence as well. So she says, morning, Nana. You spoke about lifetime value of a customer. How do you arrive at it? I own a coffee shop and my business has just gone online with a takeaway and delivery service. So it's a really good question. And there is a specific formula that you can apply to the lifetime value number, but it's generally, and you probably need to do this from an assumptions point of view. If you're unsure right now, if you're just about to, you've just launched your service online. But the first part is, okay, so for each customer, how much revenue do I expect to generate from them as a result of an action? So for example, you may assume that those that walk into a coffee shop, they spend X amount on drinks, X amount on food. And you total that up, and that will be the assumed cost, the assumed value that a customer gives you. And then you need to figure out, right, how many customers do you expect to get for the year, let's say. So then you've got, let's say, 1,000 customers. They all spend, £10 per visit, and let's just assume for the ease of the numbers that they do so once a year. So you've got 1,000 customers, they each spend £10, therefore you've got £10,000. Then the question after that is, how long do you think each customer is actually going to stay with you? So, you may have some regulars that come into the shop, or you assume will also translate over to the online service. So you would say, okay, I expect them to, buy from me for the next, 3 years at that rate. Okay, so that 10,000 then becomes £30,000. So once you actually divide that number by the 3 years, let's say, you'll end up with a number that is very clear as into, right, my customer spends X amount per year with me, and I expect them to stay with me for the next 3 years. You obviously need to take into account things like churn. Churn is effectively how many customers you expect to leave you. It's a sad thing, but unfortunately, customers do leave all of us at some time. So just having to think about that is really important. But there are formulas on the internet that are pretty straightforward to help you calculate these, specifically for physical shops as well. And then we're coming to the last few minutes, but I think I can fit in a few more questions. So Judy from Twitter asks, what is the minimum investment required to set up a consumer research strategy? That is a very difficult question to answer, mainly because I'm not convinced that there is a minimum investment from a kind of cash outward point of view. Based on one of the questions that Jacqueline asked earlier about having a small team, my argument would be that your time is money. So how much, if you were to do this process that I kind of talked about, how much time do you think it would take you, and how much does that equate to in itself? And then the amount of time that's kind of involved to create the strategy is very dependent on how deep you want to go. So my view is it's less at this time about the minimum investment required to set up a consumer research strategy. My view is focus on making sure that the results that the activity that you take is based on what customers need, and then see as a result of those insights what you should do. Okay, so we've come to the last question, but I'm happy to answer any questions outside this talk. So now I'm going to react to the poll results. So we asked you, have you prepared your business for the next 6 months? And 17% of you said yes, and 83% of you said no. So yeah, that's really interesting results, because it's really difficult especially in the pandemic, for us to plan as much as we would like to, because things just aren't as consistent as possible. However, based on the fact that 83% of you said no, probably because you're kind of focused on running the day-to-day, maybe you're focused on retaining some of these customers, acquiring new customers. But what I would say is spend some time trying to just figure out, okay, if I can understand what my customers need now, and I can set myself up to commit to regularly getting insights from different customers, then I will be able to come up with a strategy and come up with a plan, even if it's not as long as 6 months, it's a bit shorter, to actually be able to, start to plan a little bit ahead. But I appreciate it's very difficult, especially in these times. Okay, so we're coming to the end now. So if you have any questions, then please get in touch with the QuickBooks support team on Facebook, or myself on LinkedIn under Nana Parry. And coming up on Ask the Expert tomorrow is Jenny Tsai, who is the CEO and founder of Verisma, a global pioneer in the influencer enterprise software. Verisma's platform enables global brands across numerous sectors, including luxury, beauty, and fashion, to foster reliable, highly successful relationships with key influencers. So here's a reminder that if you need any more advice, join the official Intuit QuickBooks SMB community group on Facebook. Accountants and business experts are on hand 24/7. So thank you very much for tuning in. Really appreciate your time and all the questions as well. And yeah, have a great start to the day, and happy to answer any questions outside. Thank you.